My mother-in-law forced me out, so I cut off their financial lifeline. For years, I was the silent force behind our household's success. My husband, Mark, was the love of my life, or so I thought. I believed we were partners, a team working towards building a future together. But after his mother, Evelyn, moved in, the cracks in our marriage began to show. Her presence became suffocating, and what started as small frustrations eventually erupted into a full-blown crisis that left me out on the streets. But little did Evelyn or Mark know that when they kicked me out, they were cutting off the very financial lifeline that kept their world spinning. It was time for them to feel the consequences of their actions, and I was finally ready to put myself first. Part 1. The beginning of the end. I'll never forget the day Evelyn moved in with us. It was supposed to be temporary, a few months at most. She'd been having trouble managing her finances after some bad investments wiped out her savings. Mark, being the dutiful son, suggested she stay with us while she sorted things out. I wasn't thrilled, but family is family, and I agreed. At the time, I didn't realize what I was agreeing to. Looking back, it was the first step in the dismantling of my marriage. Evelyn arrived with 2 suitcases and a sharp tongue. From the moment she walked through the door, she made it clear that she didn't approve of the way I ran the household. She had never liked me, not from the day Mark and I started dating. I wasn't traditional enough for her liking. I had a career, I made my own money, and I wasn't dependent on my husband like she thought a good wife should be. And she let me know that in subtle, cutting remarks. "Do you ever cook a proper meal?" she'd ask, looking at the takeout containers in the fridge. Back in my day, wives made sure dinner was ready on time, not ordered from some restaurant. I'd laugh it off, trying not to let her words get under my skin. Mark, of course, said nothing. He always wanted to keep the peace, and I couldn't blame him for that. But as the months dragged on, Evelyn's presence began to take a toll on me. What was supposed to be a short stay turned into a permanent arrangement. She began rearranging the house, making changes without asking me, and treating me like an outsider in my own home. Part 2. Evelyn's subtle manipulation. The real problem wasn't just Evelyn's passive-aggressive remarks, it was how she manipulated Mark. Slowly but surely, she began driving a wedge between us. She'd complain about me behind my back, twisting every little thing I did into a problem. I didn't cook enough, I worked too much, I wasn't giving Mark the attention he deserved, and Mark, who had always been reasonable before, began to echo her complaints. "I've been thinking," he said one night as we sat at the dinner table, "maybe you should cut back on your hours at work. You're always so busy, and we hardly spend any time together anymore." I blinked at him, confused. "Mark, I'm working to keep us comfortable. Between the mortgage, the bills, and everything else, we need my income." "Yeah, but maybe we don't need to live in such a big house. We could downsize, and you wouldn't need to work so much." His words stung. We had worked hard to afford this house, and now he was suggesting we give it up because his mother thought I should be more of a stay-at-home wife. It didn't make sense, but I could see Evelyn's influence in every word he said. As the weeks passed, the arguments between us increased. I'd come home from a long day at work, only to find Evelyn and Mark sitting together, whispering about something. When I entered the room, they'd stopped talking, and the tension was palpable. "She's just trying to help," Mark would say when I confronted him. "You're overreacting." But I wasn't overreacting. I could feel it in my bones. Evelyn was driving us apart. She wanted me out of the picture, and Mark was too blind to see it. Part 3. The turning point. It all came to a head one evening when I returned home after an exhausting day at work. I walked through the door and immediately sensed something was wrong. Evelyn was in the living room, arms crossed, her lips pursed in disapproval. Mark sat on the couch, avoiding eye contact. "Can we talk?" Evelyn said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. I dropped my bag on the floor, already knowing this wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. "Sure," I replied, bracing myself. "We've been discussing things, and it's clear that your lifestyle doesn't fit this household," Evelyn began. "You're always at work, Never here to take care of Mark, and frankly, it's putting a strain on our family. I raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? You heard me. Mark deserves better. Someone who can be there for him, someone who can take care of him properly. You're not living up to your role as a wife. I glanced at Mark, expecting him to jump in and defend me, but he just sat there, silent. Evelyn continued, emboldened by his lack of response. I think it's best if you leave. Mark and I have decided that you're no longer welcome here. I felt like I had been slapped in the face. My own husband, the man I had supported financially and emotionally for years, was letting his mother kick me out of my own house, a house I had paid for. I looked at Mark, searching for any sign of the man I once loved, but all I saw was weakness. He had let her poison his mind against me, and now I was being cast aside like I meant nothing. Without saying another word, I turned and left the house. I didn't take much with me, just the essentials. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay in a place where I wasn't respected. Part 4. The Financial Fallout. For the first few days, I stayed with a friend, processing what had just happened. I was hurt, of course, but more than that, I was angry. Angry at Mark for letting his mother destroy our marriage, and angry at myself for not seeing it sooner. But then I realized something. Evelyn had no idea that I was the one keeping their household afloat. She probably assumed that Mark was the one paying all the bills, covering the mortgage, and taking care of her medical expenses. She had no clue that without me, they'd be in serious financial trouble. So, I made a decision. I stopped paying for everything. The mortgage? I stopped covering it. The utilities? Stopped those too. Evelyn's expensive medications and doctor's appointments? She could figure that out on her own. I had been the one silently paying for all of it, and now it was time for them to experience life without my financial support. A week later, Mark called me, furious. "Why aren't you paying the bills?" he demanded. "The power's been shut off, and we're getting foreclosure notices for the house." I couldn't help but laugh. "I'm not your wife anymore, remember? You and your mother made that very clear when you kicked me out. If you want the bills paid, you can figure it out on your own." Part 5. Consequences Come Knocking. The fallout was swift and brutal. Without my financial support, Mark and Evelyn's comfortable life quickly crumbled. They were behind on the mortgage, and the bank was threatening to take the house. Evelyn's health began to decline, and they couldn't afford her treatments without my income. Mark had to take up a second job just to keep the lights on, and even that wasn't enough. Meanwhile, I was thriving. I rented a new apartment, smaller but cozy, and for the first time in years, I felt free. Free from the constant judgment, the manipulation, and the weight of carrying a household that never appreciated me. I started focusing on my own happiness, reconnecting with friends, and even exploring new career opportunities. It wasn't easy, but I had finally chosen myself. Months went by before I heard from Mark again. He showed up at my door one evening, looking disheveled and defeated. "We need to talk," he said, his voice shaky. I let him in, curious to hear what he had to say. "Everything's falling apart," he admitted. "We're losing the house. Mom's health is getting worse, and I can't keep up with everything on my own. I'm sorry for what happened. I let her get in my head, and I shouldn't have. Can we try again? Can you come back?" I stared at him, hardly believing what I was hearing. After everything I had been through, after all the pain they had caused me, he wanted me to come back and pick up the pieces? I shook my head. "No, Mark, I'm not coming back. I've moved on. I've found peace without you, and I'm not going to sacrifice that for anyone, not even you." He looked devastated, but I didn't feel sorry for him. This was the bed he had made, and now he and Evelyn would have to lie in it. As he left, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. For the first time in a long time, I was in control of my own life, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me again. Epilogue. In the end, the house was foreclosed, and Mark and Evelyn were forced to move into a small apartment. Evelyn's health continued to decline, and without my financial support, they struggled to make ends meet. As for me, I had built a new life, one filled with freedom, happiness, and self-respect. I learned that sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from those who don't appreciate you. And I never looked back. After years of silently supporting her household, she is cast out by her manipulative mother-in-law and spineless husband. Little do they know that she was the one holding their lives together financially. When they kick her out, she decides to stop paying for everything, leaving them to face the harsh reality of life without her. This is a story of betrayal, empowerment, and the sweet taste of karma.